So this question is for Ed. Hi, Ed. Ed Grimsley. Do you hear me? Sorry, my English might not be good enough. I'm from Germany. So you showed us an interview. Thank you for that. And she was called Joanne, and her father-in-law is in prison. And she mentioned that he had in 1976, he had a Nazi and reptilian fighting causing earthquakes. Yes, you remember this? And I wondered if this could refer to the problems Japanese has at the moment. Am I clear? Or
basically, oh, sorry.
It's okay. I don't speak English either. Some kind of slang. I think you were asking me about Joanne Richard and about the tectonic weapons and about the problems that can cause earthquakes.
Hello.
Well, first of all, are you German and do you have a weapon? No. It's okay. I know nothing. No, what? Okay. There is a lot of problems with things leading back to Nazis and New World Order and some pretty fantastic weapons and things that may end up being used against us or for us in some way. And Joanne does know about a lot of that weaponry, and I know a lot that I basically try not to get into it, but I have a lot of technology experience on things, and I have a lot of people that contact me because of the work I'm doing and have meetings with me, because it's not safe to talk over the phone, and discuss some things that's going on. And yes, Japan's earthquake, Chile, a lot of that's going on could be the work of HARP, which could actually have relation to some of what has happened to the buildings and the towers and what Richard Hoagland is talking about. But I don't have an investigative team. I don't have the money to go out with the proof, nor I have that many lives that I want to give them up because they'll be gone. So I'm going to tell you that what he says and what Richard Dolan says, I consider that is so true, and you can't go anywhere and pay for any better knowledge than you got from those two, because what they were talking about is right on.
The microphone for the questions is going to be here.
So now I have two mics, okay?
That can also be.
Okay, so I use this one. Ernie, you good? You guys keep this one.
I think we need a mic.
I think you guys keep that one, yeah?
Hold on.
All right, so who's next? Anyone else questions, okay?
Yes,
Gentleman
over
in the
here.
back?
I'm here.
Got a mic going down there?
Yes, thank you, I'm here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, I've got someone there.
Okay, first of all, thank everyone for today. Very nice. My name is Steven. I was wanting to ask specifically to Mr. Dolan, is there a possibility that in these black ops communities that they have been playing so long with this more elegant form of physics that they have figured out, or at least are in the vicinity of figuring out, a way of running an economy in a much more collaborative way?
In other words,
has their technological superiority also given them an ethical superiority in behaving better and playing nicer? I don't see any reason that that's actually the case. My own research into this is based on two things. One is, I guess, logic. Simply the logical implications of what I think has been happening in the classified world. But the other is a variety of selective interactions with what I think may be members of that community. I've had a few. I certainly have not gotten an idea that, as a whole, the institutions in that world are any more ethical than the rest of us. I think they're just as predatory as the rest of humanity. And in fact, the impression that I get when I look at it is that, as I said earlier, I think that there are factions. That it's not just like Majestic 12 that is by itself dealing with this phenomenon. I think that they're, at this point, it's splintered, and that they compete for technology and for information and power, I guess. So the economic relationships that I don't really think, like as I said earlier, that it's like alternative 3 in the sense that they're on a completely different world. I think they still interact with us, and I still think they use our money. It's my impression.
My question is directed to Mr. Hoagland. Are you familiar with the work of Nassim Hiramein, and what is your take on his work? Because I haven't mentioned him being mentioned.
I can't quite hear the question.
Okay, are you familiar with the work of Nassim Hiramein?
I'm still missing the question.
Are you familiar with his work, and what is your
With who?
The work of Nassim Hiramein?
Oh, of course, yes.
Okay.
The acoustics are good if you don't have a microphone.
Okay, I'm sorry.
If you have a microphone, it's terrible. Yes, and I'm fascinated by his work. It's so parallel. It's so intertwined. We're all saying the same thing, and we call it by different terms. Scalar, longitudinal waves, torsion, Nassim's terms. It's all the same stuff. It's the ether. But it's not an electromagnetic ether. It's a non-electromagnetic. It is the basis of electromagnetism and weak force, strong force, all that. It's fundamental. It's what makes this. And if you can change those dynamics in 3 space, obviously, as you saw from those photographs, anything is possible. Reality is bendable. It's moldable. And the really interesting part is it's amenable to consciousness. That's the real hope, I think, for the human species. We need to take control of our own destiny by what's up here, not by this stuff.
Next question. Anybody? Yeah, gentleman over there.
Yeah. Over here.
Okay.
First of all, I want to thank the organizers and the speakers for this wonderful conference. It was amazing. Thank you. My question is directed to all panel members, especially to Mr. Hoagland. If we take into account the things that are happening at this point in time, going towards the year 2012. And if we take into account the economic situation in the world and the natural, so-called natural disasters that are taking place right now, what are their speakers doing, if anything at all, to prepare for a time where, where we cannot depend any longer on the current way of living, on the current energy sources? Are the speakers doing anything in preparation for that?
I can only speak for me, and I will tell you that we are in scary times. It's not an accident that's happening. The economical problems that are brought on us and the crashing of our society, those are all planned. And I, myself, have gotten ready on the food end of it. And I also live in a country where we can still have guns and freedom. And I'm quite able to defend myself if some are coming in to get what I have or protect my family. I hope that others are, but in some countries you can't. So if you've given up your guns already, you may want to invest in a bow and arrow or a slingshot. So, but definitely it's coming, it's going to get worse.
And I think exactly the opposite. I am so damn tired of the fear. Let us stop with the damn fear. It's a control mechanism. The idea is to put you as a deer in the headlights, to paralyze you so you don't realize that you can't sit on a mountaintop, Ed, with a damn gun aimed at the front gate all the time. You need community. Look at what's going on in Japan. No looting, no rioting, no nothing. These people are in desperate straits. And instead of all being he, me, and I for myself, they're pitching in, they're helping, they're a community. They think of other human beings along with themselves as a human family. That, if we are facing problems, and yes, we are, that's what's going to get us through, not hiding behind a barricade with a .45 looking like Clint Eastwood.
I appreciate what he says, and I honor his right to think it. But if he has somebody kicking in his door looking for his food, he might want to borrow one of my guns.
I actually just want to agree with Richard on this, although I will admit that as a hedge against inflation, if you go to my house, you'll see a nice stockpile of canned foods and dry goods and things like that, and it's just my little quirk. But, you know, for the long term, if the stuff really starts to collapse, you know, you can have your .45, but how much good is that going to do against armed gangs anyway? Probably not much. So really our hope is in working together exactly that way. And I also feel just as strongly against the concept of fear. I ended AD after disclosure with one message, and it was the message of no fear. Fear is probably our worst enemy, and as I said earlier, I think our species has gone through some very, very difficult times, and we've gotten through it. That's just what life is. Life is tough, but I think that if we work together, cooperate, we can get through anything.
Hi, my name is Ken Connery from Los Angeles, California. Last week, the LA Times had an article about the XB-37, I think. That craft is able to go up and be in orbit for about 260 days. And the article mentioned that this was the second time that craft has actually gone up. And so everything else was, we can't tell you anything about the missions or the purpose or things like that. Does anybody on the panel have any more details that they'd like to share with us? Thank you.
We've got to get Peter a question here, because he's got the really most interesting part, which is the Nazi connection. Okay, so let me answer this question. The XB-37 I find absolutely fascinating, because I think everything we're reading about it is a wonderful shaggy dog story. You do not know the real mission. But think of this. What terrestrial reconnaissance mission going around and around and around the Earth takes 270 days, not 260. My personal suspicion is that this is our way of fighting back against them. And what they've done with this satellite, which can actually autonomously re-enter on its own randomly so they can't find it, I think it's doing reconnaissance on the folks that have staked out territory on the moon. Not the far side, not the near side, but near the poles. In the last 40 years, this is data I didn't get to present, the Indian government launched a couple of years ago the Chandrayaan spacecraft, first unmanned Indian spacecraft to imitate the big guys, orbit the moon, even drop a little spacecraft down so it impacted the surface, making measurements all the way down. They discovered, to their shock, that the lunar atmosphere is 100 times thicker now than it was when it was measured by Apollo 40 years ago. And the composition is kind of intriguing. It's water, nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide. Does this ring a bell with anybody? If you had a base on the moon, if you were, shall we say, a breakaway civilization that had a certain crimson emblem with big geometric symbols on it, and you wanted to observe what your chattels were doing so you could move in and take control, would not the moon make the perfect place? But you can't guard against one thing. Every time you take someone out in a spacesuit, or you open an airlock, a little bit of air goes poof into the vacuum. But because the moon is a very small gravity, the solar wind quickly blows it away. For there to be 100 times, 2 orders of magnitude more lunar atmosphere now of this composition than there was when we went there 40, 50 years ago and measured it in situ with Apollo, tells me there is a base on the moon. It's not our terrestrial group. It's this other group, the ones that want to keep us down on the farm. And I think the XB-37, like lacrosse, is designed to eavesdrop and look over what they're doing to prepare for the next stage of the war. Can I prove that? No. But the moon should not have 100 times the atmosphere now that it did only 40 years ago. No. We had 6 missions. All right, we measured and measured. That was the big thing. I mean, that was really, and the instrumentation, I mean, it was Rice at University of Houston and some others. They were forced to recant by NASA when they saw ejections of water vapor from underground. In fact, NASA forced them to say, well, it might have been a urine dump from Apollo 14 in orbit. No. This is about cover-up of the reality that's out there, and I think the XB-37 is an exquisitely concealed project that's designed to help us escape from prison.
Thank you. Another question for Mr. Hoagland. How do crop circles fit into this picture?
Okay, I want to find a graph because I think Richard and I are going to have really interesting time looking at this. If I can quickly, let me go to this and pop this up because I have actually prepared a list of all the possible suspects in terms of who might be not on our side. I can get this thing to work. Come on, don't freeze. I love Bill Gates, but, come on. Okay. On my list I have 2 terrestrial protagonists, part of the military-industrial complex, which is the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers. Usual suspects. Then I've got our friends, the Nazis, developed a la, Joseph and other people, you, Peter, from World War II. The Bell Project was obviously a harbinger of this kind of torsion field physics and technology. We don't know where Kamler and Hall, that group, went. We suspect South America. Joseph has done a brilliant following the trail, showing all kinds of interrelated clues, including documents. So that's the third group. The fourth group, okay, this seems to want to come through now. Let's see, it's here somewhere. The fourth group would be, here we are, okay, would be, he said pregnantly, come on. Okay, real ETs who had helped the Nazis. See, I've always been kind of curious about this historical anomaly that we have the most breathtaking science and technological revolution from the 20s through the 40s in modern human history, and nobody says, No culture can be that damn bright. I think they had help. Because remember, I'm looking at this through the eyes of a lot of ancient stuff out there that was built by, if the model is correct, our great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmothers. We are the descendants, a very decadent descendants, of something splendiferous, something so awesome that it's mind-boggling. It blew the elite guys away who first realized how big and how much and what it meant, and they are terrified that those guys might show up. The next group are the ET visitors who are that ancient relationship to us. And they would be, in this model, our friends. They might want to help, but probably on a prime directive motif, where they give little help here and here and here. I can give you one example. In 1875, Asa Paul, who was the astronomer at the U.S. Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C., used the newly constructed 26-inch refractor to look for moons of Mars, a la Kepler and Jonathan Swift. Didn't see a thing. 2 years later, in 1877, at the behest of his wife Angelina Stickney, for whom Sagan insisted there be a big crater named on Phobos, Hall found Phobos and Deimos. I think, as did Shklovsky, the Russian astrophysicist who wrote the book with Sagan about the weirdness of the moons of Mars, I think that these guys, number 5, gently towed them into position as moons of Mars. They are in perfect tetrahedral orbits. They are coplanar. Phobos orbits every 7 hours, 39 minutes. Exquisitely tetrahedral numbers. Deimos is 3 times farther out, so it's all interlocked harmonic series. When the Russians got there in '89, with their first Phobos mission, they found that these moons are leaking atmospheres right now, which for little potatoes the size of, Berkeley, is impossible. You can't have something that ancient, i.e. the length of the solar system, and still have it outgassing. However, if it was part of the huge cataclysmic war that Joseph and I have written about, and Tom Van Flanders, and it was way out in the outer solar system, and then towed in near the sun, where it's warming up and all the frozen atmosphere and all the stuff inside is slowly outgassing, you would see trails of water vapor, which is what both of these things are spiraling around Mars, leaving behind them as cometary wakes. The data has been published in Nature by the Russians. The Russians are in the catbird seat now in 2012. Their Phobos mission will get to Phobos. And they are loaded to measure all kinds of cool stuff, provided what they find, they tell us, and there appears to be an interesting dichotomy between what the Russians are planning and what the guys controlling us are planning, and I see very interesting times up ahead to test this model. And then, of course, number 6 is we have genuine aliens, meaning they're not DNA related, and they're here as observers. Well, that's the projector in the back. Yeah. Blame that.
Well, may I just, since I've got the mic, I just would like to, I think that's an incredibly creative and maybe correct theory. Who knows?
There's nothing else
It's very interesting. I'll leave it at that for now, and that's food for thought.
Obviously, the crop circles are being done by either 5 or 6 to give us the clues to fight our way out of prison ourselves. It's very Gene Roddenberry.
Next question.
Thank you, gentlemen. Expanding our consciousness. We are in Amsterdam. We can buy mushrooms here. Would those help to expand our consciousness, or are there other tools available that could help us to expand our consciousness?
Sorry, could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, can you repeat that one?
To expand our consciousness, We are in Amsterdam. We can buy mushrooms, hemp here. Could they help us to expand our consciousness, and can we use any other tools to help us expand and increase our mind, our consciousness?
Okay, who wants to take that one?
I don't use any of the mushrooms. They're not necessary when you got the goggles. I have some friends that go out with goggles and look, and if they're under the influence of anything, I send them home, because I want to know what they see is real. And expanding the mind, there is probably a lot of government work, medical things, and I think there's probably a lot of things that is being done that could be good. It also a lot could be bad. And I think how you do or use anything, whether it's a cigarette, an alcohol, or the food you put on the table, who knows? But do it in moderation.
Anyone else want to share perspective?
I would just like to speak to that. I've been thinking, when the day will come when all of this knowledge comes out about this topic, and I am not a member of this school of thought, but there are many people who believe that DMT or ayahuasca or other types of hallucinogenics do in fact allow them to perceive this reality. Okay, so I guarantee you one thing, which is that after the truth, or after the end of secrecy, it'll be like the 60s, only like in the modern age, in the sense that there will be people who will say, just like in the 60s, turn on, tune in, drop out, there's a new reality, go past the doors of perception, and you will see that reality. There are certainly people to this day, right now, who talk about these hallucinogenic drugs, and they believe that they're experiencing an actual reality. Whether that's true or not is something that people will debate about. And so it's not something that's just going to go away. It's going to remain. It'll be part of our culture, and it might be part of kind of a cultural schism in the future. Who knows?
I think there's just one thing I'd like to add to that. If you're in Amsterdam and you want to expand your consciousness and you've already done all the drugs, and you're still looking for a way to expand your consciousness, we have some books we'd like to sell you.
I can't not answer this one. Look, if the model is correct, consciousness is already changing. Remember, these drugs are technological tools to open the door to our normal state of existence if we're accurate. Look at the Vedas, look at the Yuga cycles. We're in the Kali Yuga, which is the dumbest, stupidest, most insensitive, where you requires like a crowbar and a tactical nuclear weapon to get people to think of other dimensions. If we're really multi-dimensional species, having a 3D experience, virtual reality-wise right now, as the physics continues to change, it will be easier and easier to trigger within you this expanded perception of reality and multi-dimensions and who you really are and how many past lives you had, etc., etc., etc. And this goes hand in hand with some other predictions. For instance, there's a lot of fear, and it's used as a tool. It's the best tool money can buy. Because if you paralyze your enemy with fear, you don't need to do anything else. They're frozen. They're Bambi in the headlights. Everybody's terrified about nuclear radiation now, obviously because of Japan. But think about this. The physics in its quintessence is a balance between entropy, which is disorganization, and non-entropy, neg-entropy, which is organization. Think of superconductivity. If I'm right and the physics is changing on our behalf, meaning that more organization is coming into our perception, at the biological level, it means that molecules and chemical reactions that we depend upon for life are more stable against entropic disruption, i.e. radiation, which means the doses that would have been deleterious to us in decades past actually might not affect us, if at all, now, because The physics is not constant, and that could be measured.
Okay. Next question, please.
I'm Dr. Rauni Kilde from Finland, and I'd like to ask any of you, what are the planets that we're flying to today? I know we go to Moon, to Mars, and according to Mark Richards, also to Saturn, and he was stating that he was driving an alien craft which had consciousness. Well, we human beings, using only 10% of brain capacity, cannot understand that. Of course not.
Do you remember a story by Anne McCaffrey, science fiction from the 40s or 50s, called The Ship Who Sang?
No, I haven't.
Well, it's exactly what you're talking about. A conscious symbiosis between a human pilot and a conscious ship. And then there's been a couple of TV shows, one from Canada. What was the name of it? No, this was before. It had some very strange characters. Very unusual characters, done in Canada maybe, or New Zealand or someplace. But it was the idea that ships are not made of metal. These are conscious beings that just happen to want to be spaceships because they have freedom and unlimited vistas and new experiences. In other words, we need to get out of the fear mode and think of the potentials if Richard's universe comes true. What are we going to do if we suddenly inherit everything?
I want to add, I was in Moscow at a UFO conference. It's 1991, opened by cosmonaut General Popovich. 400 people, open to everybody, and the leader of the conference was Dr. Ashasa, who was the leader, or actually the intelligence chief of Soviet Navy at that time. They had top scientists from Soviet Academy of Sciences lecturing. One was Chernov, assistant professor of physics, who told me that he is attending NASA's meetings in the United States. And he had done research on what happens to people who have had UFO encounters and came to the same conclusions that I have also had previously, that people who have UFO encounters have the same change psychologically that people who have near-death experiences. And the most important aspect of that conference, to me at least, was that after the conference I was invited to the cellar of Skaliev-Skalkov Institute, into a cellar which was bigger than this hall, and it was full of UFO pictures, and they had thick walls, like we go to the banks, steel doors to go in. And there was a story of Anatoly Malchev, and I suppose that's why I was allowed to go there, and not the 3 Americans who were there, including General Stubbletine, who was at that time U.S. Army's chief of the intelligence. And the story of Anatoly Malchev was he was a woodworker, and all of a sudden a real UFO landed, and humanoids came out and asked him to come to a ride. This happened in 1975. And he was courageous, and he went with them. So they went around the other side of the moon, and he saw lights there. And he said, "What are these?" So the ETs said, "We have bases there." Then they continued the flight, and they went to another planet. And that's why I asked, where do we fly? Because he flew to another planet with them, and when they opened the door, he got the shock of his life, which I think is very, very important for all of us here on planet Earth to know. All his dead relatives and friends were there meeting him. So we are in a way one. Humanoid ETs, our dead consciousness is never dead, but we and humans. So in a way, we're all one, and I think we should know that.
Yeah.
I think that was a very good question, but as far as to what planets we're flying to, I have seen battles go on with vision, goggles, and watched the rescue capsules pick up the strode light capsule, and watched craft pick them up and be escorted and picked up by 3 craft, and they headed directly out, and we watched them as long as we could with as much power as we could, and they headed straight for the moon. And that's where I know they were heading for then. They might have needed to give medical assistance or whatever, but we've also seen, though, the opposite direction of the moon, and flying out into deep space with supplies that were, like we saw on the movie tonight, trellising below it. So I think we're heading towards Mars. I think we're going into the moon, and who knows where else, but we're going a lot of places that we're not being told about. And
Okay, thank you. Next question, because we have to speed up.
Just two short questions. I'd like to know, for the audience here, and also the panel up there, how many of you have seen UFOs? Really? Well, thank you. I asked that question because last year in October, I live on the west coast of Scotland, and 1:30 in the morning, there was a flyby of 6 UFOs, which we were absolutely amazed when we saw them fly past. We saw them come from the west, going to the east, and they were quite high up, and the speed must have been phenomenal. They crossed the distance with, I would imagine, Mach 12, something like that. And I was enjoying the presentation of the last speaker when he was talking about 6, so that we saw the 6 flying. I've actually seen that myself, which is very encouraging. But I would also like to say that the panel, I've got to know you through another source, and that's Bill Ryan and Cara Cassidy from Project Camelot. Those people were really the people who inspired me to, concentrate and take particular interest in these subjects. And I think it's a shame they're not here tonight. I'd love to have met them. But I would like to thank all of you for all your effort you put into this to try and make us, all of us, aware of what's going on and what our future and the future of our children is going to be, because that's very important indeed. And I think you're doing a damn good job. Thank you all.
Absolutely. Do we have any more questions?
2 last questions, one for Timothy and one for Peter, the last one.
Timothy, when someone has an alien abduction experience, do you think that their physical body is actually taken, or is it happening on a mental or on the soul level?
I'd say it can be either, depending on circumstances.
Okay. Okay, last question. This one is for Peter. He touched on it shortly in his presentation, and this is going to be the bedtime story for tonight. It was not a bedtime story for Peter. When you are an organizer from these things and you're having breakfast with speakers, they're going to tell you things in more detail and what you don't hear on presentations. When I had breakfast with Richard Dolan and Peter Lavenda, he told the complete story of what he experienced in Chile. So, Peter, go ahead.
Thank you, Jeroen, for telling tales out of school. But basically, yes, the story of going to Chile, this happened in 1979. In June of 1979, to be precise. I was 28 years old. Stopped calculating. And I had heard rumors, I had heard stories about a secret Nazi base in Chile, in the Andean mountains. I had come across this story in Ladislas Farago's book Aftermath, which sort of blew the lid off of the fact there was a Vatican connection to Nazi war criminals escaping. He was chasing Martin Bormann, stories about Martin Bormann in South America. But as almost a footnote, as a very short mention, he mentioned this colony, Colonia Dignidad, the colony of righteousness, or the colony of dignity. And he said they had weird religious rituals. They were Nazis who ran a kind of safe house for war criminals, and it sounded like a Robert Ludlum novel. And how could I miss, going there? So, like an idiot, 28 years old, Chile is under martial law. Pinochet has taken over. Pinochet is a lover of Nazi stuff, memorabilia. I mean, his soldiers were dressed in Wehrmacht helmets. They goose-stepped. His officers had, knives that were engraved with slogans. I mean, he duplicated essentially the Third Reich in Chile. And I decide to take 2 weeks vacation from my job at the time on my own dime and fly down from New York to Santiago and make my way to Parral, which is a town south, a couple of hours, 3-4 hours south of Santiago, and to go up there on my own and see this estate, this Nazi estate. I brought a camera. I figured the least I can do is take a few photographs, turn around and go home, and I'll have the only photographs of Colonia Dignidad in captivity. So I'm a New Yorker. At that time, I had never learned to drive. I was 28 years old. We don't drive in New York. We have taxis for that, and subways and things. So I had to take public transportation, and I took a bus down through Chile. Again, martial law. It's a very dangerous place, but I was invulnerable. Great cover, yes. Right. And I go to Parral, and that night that I arrive like at 4 o'clock in the morning or something. It's a very eerie place, a very small town, a lot of roosters croaking, or whatever you want to call it, crowing. What is it? I don't know, crowing, yes. And it was strange, and an old guy comes out on a bicycle like something out of a Fellini movie, and he says he's the night watchman of the town, etc. To make a long story short, we hang out that night with a couple of the local police. Because I'm a weird guy who shows up in this town that nobody ever goes to in the middle of the night. And so the cops are feeding me aguardiente, a homemade kind of moonshine, and we're all getting drunk, and they're telling me, don't go there. Do not go to the colony. The colony is a very dangerous place. We don't like it. It's run by Germans, for Germans. We're not allowed to go there, and we're the police. And in those days, the police and the army was the same. They had been militarized the entire country. So they're telling me, no, don't go. They have weapons, they have guns. They have a clinic, however, that's free to the local people 2 days a week, run by a German nurse, which is like my nightmare. Having gone to Catholic school, it's either a nun or it's a German nurse. So, after all this discussion, they say, we can bring our kids up for free 2 days a week. We don't like to go there. It's a last resort, and sometimes our kids don't come back. So after all of that warning, Sunday morning, that morning I'm still awake. I've been drinking all night. I said, oh, the hell with it. I'm going. So I convinced the driver to drive me up. Again, I don't drive. And we go up about an hour outside of town, up into the Andes Mountains. We go into a beautiful estate. The gates are open. There's a parking lot. It's very well manicured. I get out and I said, okay, wait for me. I'm going to take a couple photographs. I take my photographs. I get back into the car. We turn around to leave. The gates close electronically in front of us. A white Mercedes pulls out to block our way. 4 doors open, and 4 of the largest human beings I've ever seen emerge from the car, and they start kicking the tires of our car and sort of walking around and smiling at us. So my driver now is petrified in fear. His hands are gripping the steering wheel. He's saying, oh no, oh no, oh no, over and over again. Someone knocks on the passenger side window. I roll down the window, and it's a guy in a blue lab coat, right? So he asks me some questions in Spanish. Now I speak Spanish, but I was not going to bargain for my life in a foreign language. So I said, I'm sorry, I don't speak a word. So he spoke English immediately. And he said, okay, where are you from? What are you doing here? I'm just a tourist. Yeah, right, in Chile in 1979. Tourist capital of the world, right? So he, of course, disbelieves me entirely. And then the leader of the colony steps out. This is a man called Paul Schaefer. He was dressed in a military uniform, khaki hat, fatigue cap, Sam Brown belt, the whole thing. He doesn't speak English, but he's asking me questions through his interpreter, this guy in the blue lab coat. German uniform, yes. And at the same time he's asking me questions, the other big burly guys are talking to my driver. And they're asking him, how many of them are there? When did they arrive? Where are they staying? We have to be careful of these Israelis. They have diabolical intentions. Okay, I'm 28 years old. I must have weighed 120 pounds, fully dressed. There was no way I would pass for an Israeli commando. I would like to think that I would pass for an Israeli commando, but that was absurd. So he's not answering. My driver is just petrified. He thinks he's not getting out of there alive. As it turned out later, he had good reason to believe that. So I'm sitting in the passenger seat, and I'm answering questions, and they say, okay. They give me the phrase I've waited all my life to hear at that time. In a German accent, they ask me, your papers, please. It was remarkable. I would have enjoyed it had I not had, people with guns standing around me. So I passed over the passport. They took it and they kept it for 20 minutes, 30 minutes. I never saw it until later. They took the film out of my camera. They asked me what I was doing there. I said, I'm there studying European immigration. That got a big laugh. Rightfully so, but that's all I could think of at the moment. And eventually they gave me back my passport. And this is the worst part. They said, okay, you will leave. You will leave this country. You're no longer welcome in this country. This is a small Nazi, or not that small as it turned out, but a Nazi establishment up in the middle of the mountains, far from Santiago, and they tell me you're not welcome. So I get back in the car, the gates open, my driver is hysterical with relief. The hour and a half trip up to the mountains we made back in about 20 minutes. We get back into Parral. He gets out. I give him a whole bunch of money. I don't know how much I gave him. I just gave him money. And we're approached, or I'm approached by two carabineros, two local police that I hadn't seen before. And they walk up to me and they say, are you Lavenda? And I said, yeah. Can we see your passport? Sure. Give them the passport. They give it back to me. They say, okay, what did you see? How many guns? How are they armed? They were more curious about what I had seen than they were about me. I answered them as best as I could. The bus arrived. I got on my bus going back to Santiago. And on the way back, the bus had stopped several times at roadblocks. Chilean army personnel, soldiers, walk onto the bus and ask for me by name. All the way back to Santiago in 79. When I get back to my hotel room, there's a note waiting for me telling me what flight I'm on the next day. I'm on a flight to Miami. I wasn't going to Miami, but I took the flight. All of this was fine up to a point. Of course, I'm getting very nauseous. I mean, during the whole time I was perfectly cool, no fear, no problem. But I'm on the plane flying back to Miami, and I'm starting to get really ill over this thing. I'm thinking, what the hell did I do? What did I escape from? I get back into Miami, I go through immigration and customs, and there's two gentlemen waiting for me. Gentlemen from the United States government. They flash badges and they say, are you Lavenda? Where have I heard that before? But they had better accent. So they ask to see my passport, they see it, they smile, they walk away. So what the hell is going on, right? So I go and I sit down, I buy a copy of the Miami Herald, I open it up, and you can check this out. It was in July 2nd, I think, of 1979. The German parliament had just voted to extend the statute of limitations on Nazi war crimes, to extend the statute of limitations for murder. I didn't know this vote was taking place. In those days, no Google. So I didn't know what was going on. Suddenly it became clear to me. They thought I was some kind of agent provocateur. They thought I was somebody who was there trying to provoke a reaction that they would have to deal with. That's the only reason I got out of there alive. And I'm not trying to exaggerate this. This is something that we all face as researchers in this field. We come across things that are very strange and very dangerous. But the reason I know I was very lucky was because 2 years later, a man called Boris Weisweiler, who was a professor at MIT, was hiking in Chile, maybe 10, 15 kilometers from Colonia Dignidad. But the Chilean security forces found him hiking innocently. This was still under Pinochet, as you may remember. They picked him up and took him to the colony. They took him to Colonia Dignidad. He has never been heard from since. His family has been looking for him, petitioning the U.S. government, petitioning the Chilean government, ever since then, since 1982 roughly, until now. They don't know what happened to him. Photographs of Boris Weisweiler that I found look kind of like me. We're both Eastern European background. We both had beards and glasses. It's possible they mistook him for me. And then when they realized their mistake, they couldn't let him go. Because after I came back from the States, there were news reports about the colony in Jack Anderson's column and places like that. They may have assumed that I had blurted something out. Believe me, I was trying desperately to tell this story, but nobody wanted to hear it at the time. So, yes, it was a dangerous place. It was finally raided once Pinochet left power. And when I say raided, I don't mean a couple of cops and a subpoena. They came in with the National Guard, with the military, with helicopters, half-tracks, tanks, because it was a formidable place to try to enter surreptitiously, as I found out. And they found out that the leader had disappeared. They began to look around and they found underground torture chambers that they had used to torture political prisoners during the Pinochet regime. They did it by remote control. This was a weird thing, sort of out of a science fiction novel. They had people strapped to iron beds, and the iron beds... I got the signal. So the iron beds were connected to electrical systems, and the remote control guy would sit there in his booth, and he would turn on the juice and interrogate people through loudspeakers. They never saw who was talking to them. They never saw their interrogators. They just had to answer the questions and be tortured. So all of this has come out. Much more has been discovered, and the Chilean government is refusing to release the information. So, yeah, okay.
I want to add a postscript. If you've been watching the pattern of earthquakes, shallow earthquakes going on around the planet right now, I think that's part of the war. And one smashed that compound a few months ago, decimated it. And I was informed, I hate sources, but this source corroborated our own calculations. Somebody got even. And that's why I think one of these guys, one of these groups, is in fact our unfriend, the Nazis.
But I have a lot of technology experience on things, and I have a lot of people that contact me because of the work I'm doing and have meetings with me, because it's not safe to talk over the phone, and discuss some things that's going on. And yes, Japan's earthquake, Chile, a lot of that's going on could be the work of HARP, which could actually have relation to some of what has happened to the buildings and the towers and what Richard Hoagland is talking about. But I don't have an investigative team. I don't have the money to go out and get the proof, nor I have that many lives that I want to give them up because they'll be gone. So I'm going to tell you that what he says and what Richard Dolan says, I that is so true, and you can't go anywhere and pay for it.
In a much more collaborative way.
In other words, has their technological superiority also given them an ethical superiority in behaving better and playing nicer? I don't see any reason that that's actually the case. My own research into this is based on two things. One is, I guess, logic. Simply the logical implications of what I think has been happening in the classified world. But the other is a variety of selective interactions with what I think may be members of that community. I've had a few. I certainly have not gotten an idea that, as a whole, the institutions in that world are any more ethical than the rest of us. I think they're just as predatory as the rest of humanity. And in fact, the impression that I get when I look at it is that, as I said earlier, I think that there are factions. That it's not just like Majestic 12 that is by itself dealing with this phenomenon. I think that there
So this question is for Ed. Hi, Ed. Ed Grimsley. Do you hear me? Sorry, my English might not be good enough. I'm from Germany. So you you showed us an interview. Thank you for that. And she was called Joanne, and her father-in-law is in prison. And she mentioned that he had in 1976 he had a Nazi and reptilian fighting causing earthquakes. Yes, you remember this? And I wondered if this could refer to the problems Japanese has at the moment. Am I clear? Or
basically, oh, sorry.
For any better knowledge than you got from those two, because what they were talking about is right on.
The microphone for the questions is going to be here.
So now I have two mics, okay.
That can also be.
Okay, so I use this one. Naomi, you good? You guys keep this one.
I think we need a mic.
I think you guys keep that one, yeah?
Hold on.
All right, who's next? Anyone else questions, okay?
Yes,
Gentleman
I'm
in the
here.
back?
I'm
Got a
here.
mic going down there?
Yes, thank you, I'm here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, we've got someone there.
Okay, first of all, thank everyone for today. Very nice. My name is Steven. I was wanting to ask specifically to Mr. Dolan, is there a possibility that in these black ops communities that they have been playing so long with this more elegant form of physics that they have figured out, or at least are in the vicinity of figuring out, a way of running an economy?
It's okay. I don't speak English either. Some kind of slang. I think you were asking me about Joanne Richard and about the tectonic weapon and about the problems that can cause earthquakes.
Hello.
Well, first of all, are you German and do you have a weapon? No. It's okay. I know nothing. No, what? Okay. There is a lot of problems with things leading back to Nazis and New World Order and some pretty fantastic weapons and things that may end up being used against us or for us in some way. And Joanne does know about a lot of that weaponry, and I know a lot that I basically try not to get into it.